Good evening, everyone. I hope you're all having a wonderful day. Let's head over into Collectively Rewilding. We have a lot to cover tonight, and we probably won't be able to cover everything that we'd like to, but we will get as much done as we're able to, for sure. First of all, we have the article that we've been going over in Collectively Rewilding. That is the 10 Ways to Spot Common Fruit Tree Diseases Before They Become a Bigger Problem by House Digest. Excuse me. As you can see, I'm getting the final article about that topic put together. There are 4 more issues they cover. These 3 could be considered diseases. The final sooty mold is not. It is an infestation or interaction with a mold spore. I'm not sure exactly what you would call that. All right, that is the final thing for that entire article. There were 10 overall, but these last 4, mostly the article provided natural options. There were a couple of places that you couldn't reverse it entirely, and there was only one suggestion that really was against what we talk about here, and we'll go over a lot of that kind of information within the first few articles, because there is a repetition that you'll see throughout all of the different articles. We have 6 so far. We're going to have an overall document available to you that has all of these different topics covered for disease and natural treatment. And this is that final piece. So there are already 6 reviews here in Collectively Rewilding. As you see, I was just taking a cheat real quick and copying this so I didn't have to type it all up again. And these have a lot of repetition already. With the few that are remaining, there is one item that is not what we would recommend here in Collectively Rewilding. All right. So what we talk about when we're doing things as Collectively Rewilding, we're looking for avoiding any sort of chemical interaction. There are alternatives for almost everything. People grew food and raised animals before all of the chemical interaction that we have today. So there's always going to be more options available than those created in a lab. All right, the very first item that we covered, powdery mildew, is actually common not only to trees, but to plants, especially those kept indoors or in a greenhouse setting. And so these are useful across the board, not just for trees. And that's a really nice little piece to start with, right? So powdery mildew natural treatment options. What we've done is we've had AI gather a variety of natural treatment options from across the internet, and then we've torn those apart for you in several of these articles that we put together for you. There is almost always a multitude of options. Some things that are called natural, we don't consider natural here. Let's see what it has specifically for powdery mildew. When you get into powdery mildew, it was really nice. There were a lot of obviously natural options right off. Now, when we think about baking soda, however, we don't tear that apart too much. Baking soda is a lab-created or industry-created item, all right? This will go over the information of what baking soda is. We wanted you guys to understand each of these pieces. When there is any sort of natural or artificial chemical explanation for what's going on, we wanted you to have that, all right? So this is the information about baking soda. It's going to break down how they create that. You can't go out and dig up baking soda somewhere, all right? This here is just the article that is about milk spray. These are the articles that the Google Chrome AI service put together for you. Obviously, milk spray, that's natural. We don't need to tear that one apart much. Then you have the article as well as the information with baking soda, because that's a little bit more towards that lab or industry created type of intervention. And we leave that to each of you to decide. Obviously, most of us eat products that contain baking soda. Neem oil, great item. There's a little bit of introduction to it because we don't just obviously know right off the top of our heads, most of us, what neem oil is. So I encourage you to jump into anything where it is information provided from Collectively Rewilding so that you really understand what it is that you're doing when you apply these different options to your plants, right? Potassium bicarbonate. Again, this is industry created. And so here is the breakdown of what that is. These are, again, things that we are very regularly using in all types of different products that are around us. So it's up to each of us if we want to put something like that onto our plants. It is not something like an insecticide or a fungicide or any of those to the level that they are neonicotinoids where they kill the pollinator population. This is not anything along those lines, all right? Potassium bicarbonate. Sulfur, obviously, that is a natural element. So you have a little bit of a breakdown of what sulfur is, just so that you can really understand what you're dealing with. These are some preventative practices. We've provided the links that they got these from just so that you can tear through it as much as you want. Obviously, there's no chemical intervention here, so we don't have any complaints or need for extra information. And then they have some other things to consider about timing, testing on a small area, and monitoring regularly. And some of you may think that talking about tree sprays and natural treatments for trees, that this is an inappropriate time for that. This is actually the right time for many of our trees. And it comes down to when they flower, if they flower, and your growing zone. But we're pretty cold here in Utah. We're in the 6B, 7A growing zone in the Tooele Valley. And that is putting us ever into the colder regions. We were recently in 7A, 7B. Now we've gone a little bit colder and we are in 6B to 7A. However, this is an excellent time for us to go out and deal with a lot of our trees. Excuse me. Let me take a quick drink there. We actually have aspens on our property and it's a residential property. So those of you who know aspens know that's a really bad idea. And we have an entire stand. It's more of a line, but it is a little stand of aspen here on our property that have already broken the main water line to the house with previous owners. They had to get that fixed. And they were honest, they disclosed that, we were aware of it. Had they not even had any problems yet or mentioned anything that they dealt with, we would have still known we had to get those aspens out of our yard. And we'll be girdling those soon. We're going to do a video about that. This is going to be our first experience. You'll have to bear with us. And it's a little nerve-wracking with aspen, more so than the typical tree you might be girdling or killing. You are killing a tree when you're girdling it. You're stripping the outer layer of bark. Aspen as a stand will be one plant, one root system. And when you breach a certain portion of the bark, when you cut through a certain level of the inner bark, it sends a signal to the roots to get more aggressive about growing. So we really want to avoid cutting into that inner cambium or inner bark layer that will signal more growth to the aspen roots that are already just pervading our lawn. We're also going to do some natural chemical intervention with vinegar, Dawn, salt, and water. I believe that's all that I'm going to be utilizing. I'd have to look over my mix, but I'm pretty sure. You really want to be cautious, especially when you're using salt. That will kill any living thing that is growing in your yard. Even something that's adapted to salt, when you have that vinegar in there, it doesn't matter. You're getting it. In wartime, they would salt the ground because it stopped anything growing until enough of that salt had been washed away or absorbed by the soil and broken down, okay? Very carefully applying Dawn, vinegar, salt, and water. The liquid elements put equal parts and then add in, you know, a decent little bit of salt, a half a cup, something like that of salt to a gallon. Anything like that, you have to be very careful when you're using it, all right? We will be covering that with you. This is the right time for dealing with your tree. All right. There are a lot of different diseases, a lot of different diseases in here that you can look over that cover all kinds of different plants. All right. Even when it's going to put something into the title like apple or pear, it may include other trees. So just take a good look if you have any trees at all, go through these to be aware of the natural treatment options that you have available to you. One of the big ones we've talked about a little bit, I believe. It didn't get covered there. Let's jump in. Oh, we were in powdery mildew. Let's jump into apple scab. So when you have chemically created options, a lot of times there was a natural alternative, and now that is created chemically for you. One of those options is urea. Urea is essentially urine. They can create the overall chemical structure of urea in a lab. However, it lacks a lot of the good components that your urine is built of. There are actually nutrients in your urine because you absorb nutrients, and that processes through your body as well. So you lose all of the good things that go along with the urea, or almost ammonic element of your urine. It becomes a cleaner, all kinds of things. It's very interesting, right? Kind of gross, but real. The chemical compound has these nutritive elements in it. And when they create it in the lab, all they create is a toxin that gets rid of different kinds of problems. You can create your own urea. It is very specific. It is not something that you want to do with laissez-faire. You want to pay attention to what you're doing. It's easy. We've put an article in here for you that was put together by Grow Veg that works in collaboration with Mother Earth News. And they go over the technical elements that you need to follow in order to have it be a properly usable substance. And understand that this is something that has been utilized by humans since before the written word. We know of it so long ago that it was definitely something that has been utilized by our ancestors time out of mind, and can safely be done to truly improve the quality of your soil and your biome, your environment that you are in, right? Really, really interesting information there. Copper, sulfur, this is one of the few that we do talk about, and we do not recommend it. This is why it's so good to do your research. This was in an article that was overall more geared towards a natural treatment, but this particular treatment did not even tell you what the other ingredients were. They would not openly communicate in their literature what the 50% of other ingredients were. Not a good option. All right. That's how you want to utilize these articles. They are set up very clearly for you to be able to know exactly what you're putting onto your plants, as well as how to utilize natural treatments, which we found for every single item that was listed in this article that so heavily favored chemical intervention, right? Continuing on, let's jump into something I'm really excited about. We've talked about square foot gardening and the fact that Mel Bartholomew, who created square foot gardening, has something he calls Mel's Mix. And it is a very specific mixture of ingredients to create a friable or very loosely structured soil that's easily worked. However, his mixture is unsustainable. We have found alternatives to the two elements of Mel's Mix that are sustainable and fit the criteria for what Mel himself originally envisioned in his square foot gardening method. He's no longer with us. I did look it up, and he passed away in 2016. But his board is still very active. He turned Square Foot Gardening into a nonprofit. He wants to see it go, or he wanted to see it go all over the world, and it has gone global. We, of course, would love to see any kind of positive growing techniques grow even further, but there is definitely a global outreach for his method. Really wonderful. We're going to try to collaborate actually with the nonprofit board for the change up that we're calling CR's Mix instead of Mel's Mix, because it's the same basic criteria. And I think that they'll really see the value of this, and perhaps you'll see something coming in the future of a collaboration between Square Foot Gardening and Collectively Rewilding. Really exciting. Let's go tear that recipe apart. And it's very basic. You cannot, how do I want to say this? You can't patent recipes. So this is something that anyone can do, anyone can share. It's just not something that the Square Foot Gardening organization is already doing. And so I'm hoping that in working with them, just openly sharing with them what it is that we're doing here and how that can turn their method into a sustainable option, just I think goes so well with their own message, because they heavily and openly discuss the fact that both vermiculite and peat moss, which are two of the 3 ingredients in Mel's mix, are unsustainable resources. All right. So in the Square Foot Gardening method, you have Mel's mix, and now there is the Collectively Rewilding mix for those of you who are interested in a more sustainable or can be completely sustainable alternative to Mel's mix. CR's mix replaces vermiculite, which is a substance that has to be mined, with either grow stones or rice hulls. Grow stones are recycled glass that are formed into a little rock-like object. I've got the video talking about it here. Interesting idea. As they do very slowly break down, they release silica. And this is all discussed deeply here for you so that you understand, again, what it is that you're putting with your plants. Glass is simply sand that has been melted into glass, and as it breaks down, it releases silica into the sand, and that is something most plants need. Sand is almost always a component of garden mixes or potting mixes. You don't want too much sand. The bad ones have too much, but you do want some sand in most garden mixes. So you're not doing anything that is detrimental. You're also utilizing a renewable resource. Sand is a new renewable resource. We do need to start watching our use of sand, excuse me, and start better recycling the glass that's already out there, respecting it more as a resource in general, but it does renew itself. And we are using a recycled variation in this model here. Also, rice hulls, those are the seed casings that are, well, it's the casing that is around the actual rice that we eat, all right? And that has no value to the industry, but it's one of those things like in Mel's mix when he talks about compost being typically from some sort of waste industry, such as wood, cotton, mushrooms, you know, all of these different industries have waste material. A lot of that can be utilized in the garden. Rice hulls are an example of that, and they mimic the elements of vermiculite, the water retention, and the friability or looseness to the soil structure that vermiculite offers. When you are looking for whether or not you want to use grow stones or rice hulls, it'll depend, in my opinion, on how you want to use your soil. Grow stones will work very well in large potted plants, such as trees. This is absolutely what I will be using when I start potting my lemon and avocado trees. Those have to be grown in a greenhouse environment here in this grow zone. I've heard other information recently, but we're going to wait a little while and see if they are able to grow the types of lemon and avocado trees that they had in California here in Utah. They had been told they can grow this certain type. I don't have enough information for you going forward. Hopefully that will be someone that actually joins our membership here in Collectively Rewilding, and they can talk to you about their own experience as they try growing lemon trees and avocado trees outdoors here in Utah. That's a big part of what we do here, right? We're experimenting with things that are more sustainable, that are more in line with our natural environment, native plants, creating canopies on our own residential properties, all of this type of information. It's exploration. There's not a handbook to go about doing a lot of this. So we learn here together in Collectively Rewilding. All right, now when I'm doing smaller potted plants, my seedlings, you can see some of that over here, the flats that I'm going to fill with CR's mix to get my seeds started and the transplants to go into the garden from those seedlings, we'll be using rice hulls instead of grow stones because they're much smaller. And I have a photo of that for you. Let's take a quick peek at that. Go into the Rewilding community, and it should be right towards the top here. Yes, all right. This is some of what my setup is right now as I'm going forward. Everything's starting to speed up. We have so much to talk about. We may not get to it all today, so we're going to move to weekly classes. And this is a mixture of a lot of the different things that I'm working on here at Collectively Rewilding, all right? The rice hulls are purchasable in cubits or large bulk bags, and that is where you want to go with that, as well as with sphagnum moss. I didn't need a lot at the current time, and this will break up into 14 quarts. I thought I had brought that down to show you all, but it looks like I missed that one piece, and it's not very large. It's about this big, about this thick, and it's going to break up into 14 quarts. Well, that's excellent for what I need right now. And as you can see over here, the little rectangular boxes there with the white bottoms and the clear lid, I'm going to be growing sphagnum moss here at Collectively Rewilding going forward. Sphagnum moss is perhaps a specific cultivar of moss. It might be a generalized term. These are 3 very specific sets of moss, and those we're going to go over more in depth as we continue on in another class. I want you to see them as they're going because I've already got them started, but this is that time of year where everything just moves so quickly that you may only be able to see a portion of it in one class, and we'll cover it more deeply in a future class. So for now, I had to buy some sphagnum moss, some dry sphagnum moss that will break down slowly and replace peat moss in the Mel's mix. For CR's mix, we'll be using this sphagnum moss here, along with rice hulls and compost. Our compost, we're not changing the ideology at all from what Mel's mix is. We encourage you to follow his guidelines and buy 5 different brands of compost so that you have a likelihood of increasing the nutrient content in your soil. I couldn't confirm that the compost that we buy at Lowe's or Home Depot or a local garden shop is the waste product of a specific industry, as he suggests. It does make sense. I do believe that it is quite likely true, and I couldn't find anything to the contrary either. So I think that no matter what the reality is, purchasing from a variety of brands is going to increase your nutrient content, right? So buying 5 bags at least, depending on what your soil needs are going to be, your compost needs are going to be, and you want to have an equal amount of volume for every one of those 3 items: rice hulls or grow stones, sphagnum moss, and compost. And let's just look up the definition of volume so that I don't butcher it. It is the amount of space that a substance or object occupies, not the weight, okay? You don't want to compact this stuff, so you want it to be kind of loose, and you want each one to be in equal parts. So if you put in what is about a bucket this size of compost, you want to do an equal bucket this size of rice hulls or grow stones, and then again, an equal bucket's worth of sphagnum moss. In all reality, you're probably going to be dealing with bags, such as those that we showed for the rice hulls, and then you're going to have to eyeball it a little bit. Mel has a great recommendation that you take these bags, cut them into just a slit all the way along the front, leaving a flap so that you can reuse them, right? We're all about reuse, reduce, recycle. That's an excellent way to also not have to pay money for anything. You can then put your mixture, whether you choose Mel's mix or CR's mix, you can put your mix back into those bags to store if you have some extra, which when you're making the mix, I do encourage you, as Mel does, to make some extra so that you have that there already as you continue on into the season. All right. So when I've got my mix together, we're going to do a little video of that. Look for that coming out in the next couple of days. We're going to be using a video camera as opposed to my computer camera or my phone camera. This will be a little bit more up close, so we'll have to upload it and talk about the content in next week's class. But it'll be a lot of dust flying in the air in my very messy garage. The season waits for no one, and we have enough room to work out there, but you guys are going to get to see my clutter and junk out there while we put together the first version of CR's mix. I don't believe that there is anyone out there putting this out as an opportunity for people to create a very workable, friable, nutrient filled. This will have more nutrients also, it is not only just sustainable as opposed to Mel's mix, which is unsustainable. It is more nutrient packed. Both the growth stones and rice hulls will break down into nutrients for your soils as you continue on. Really, really amazing opportunity to change the way we think about our garden soil, how hard it is to work, how sustainable it is if you don't want it to be difficult, right? That was one of the big ideology points for square foot gardening, that your soil remain workable over time. That same characteristic should show with CR's mix. Of course, we're putting it to the test this coming season and ongoing. However, it has all of the same components, and with the added mulch that we will always be putting on the top of our soil, that should see through to following what Mel's mix does for his soil in increased nutrient and sustainability, friable, workable, consistently easier to deal with garden soil, but something that we can feel good about in its entirety, right? Really neat things going forward. As you can see here, I've got a mixture of seed packets. These are the seeds that the zone 6B to 7A is able to put into seed flats, right? And I have this nice little seed flat. I don't have scraps that I could build them from or any laying around. So I went and found a reasonably priced item on Amazon. There were a lot of different options to pick from. It has a little very simplistic venting method here. It doesn't perfectly seal, but it will certainly keep the humidity in it. And you can reuse these a multitude of seasons if you take care of them. They came at 10 in a pack for something like, I don't know, $7 to $10. Very reasonable. I've also gone and purchased seedling mats because here in Utah, once again, we don't have the easiest light in our house. This will make sure the temperature is there, and most seeds don't require light to germinate. I'm reading all about the topic in this newest book that we'll cover small pieces of, the Seed Starter's Handbook. It is really interesting how in-depth she tears apart the topic of seeds and starting those seeds. I'm only about maybe a sixth of the way into the book. It's really very scientific based. I don't know that the majority of us would have interest in reading it, so I'll share those key pieces that will have the most value to our audience here in Collectively Rewilding. Really neat information though. All right, most growing zones should be able to deal with seeds started for these. If you are up in Alaska, that may not be the case. I think that would be the only place in the United States growing zones that shouldn't have at least some ability to start seeds. All right. Let's go ahead and tear into, well, it really is time for any questions or any needs that anybody has here in class. Let's check out our chat. One of our regular attendees doesn't have the option to use his microphone a lot. Doesn't look like we have any questions yet. Shall we continue on with the topic? Does anybody have any questions about what we covered? We went pretty quickly there since there are so many things happening as the earth and the soil starts heating up and quickening. It's going to be a quicker pace here in Collectively Rewilding as well. you can go ahead and just unmute yourself, or if you'd like to raise your hand, you can find that in your React tab, which will be in the Zoom toolbar that came with class. About the middle point of that toolbar, a big heart that says React. Click that. You'll see the raise your hand feature and a variety of other reactions you can take. If you don't have that big heart, continue on to the far right side where you should have a three dot more, or more menu. Click that. You'll see the reactions tab. Again, click that, and there's the raise your hand or other emojis that you can have there. Let's see what Benny's got to say. Okay. Okay, Benny asks, how can we blend the best ideas from both organic soil and regenerative soil methods to create the healthiest, most resilient soil for our rewilding project? Those terms are very loosely defined. The topics that we cover here are going to be what we are doing out of the plethora of opportunities and ideologies, methods that are out there to show you how we're going to approach that. We generally are going to be covering more than one option within a various topic, right? So when we're talking here about soil structures and how you can manage the actual soil structures on your property to increase your water retention, we covered a variety of ways to do that. We're going to tend away from talking about the options that are out there when it's more chemical or harmful intervention, such as tilling. We have a no-till policy whenever possible here at Collectively Rewilding. I do not like breaking up the soil structure, and we've talked about that some. We can always go over that anytime anybody has any questions, but your soil is basically like your own body, and when you tear up that structure, you're damaging the health, the water retention, the nutrient retention, the amount of air that is in your soil. You're damaging all of that when you till. So we'll always talk about why we've chosen different methods, and in so doing, we'll many times cover options that are out there that we're not going to employ, that are what we consider more damaging to the environment that we're working with. Does that give you some idea of the answer to your question? Like I said, the terms themselves are so vague that, especially when blending them, okay, thank you, I appreciate it. It comes down to individual choice. Do you want to find the quickest, easiest, not necessarily most cost-effective method of doing a garden through what people are going to talk to you about? You're going to end up with a lot of chemical intervention. Here, we're looking to those who have already started working at more natural solutions, as well as historic patterns that Collectively Rewilding is aware of that we can incorporate into our practices today. And there will be less of a textbook style answer. As I said, there are so many ways of going about so much of what we do here, as well as so much variance with the terms organic soil, organic as a topic for our food, regenerative farming, all of these things, even rewilding. That is a terminology that is loosely employed through the natural and agricultural world, more towards the natural thinkers there than the agricultural or for-profit side of our interaction with nature, right? It's all natural. Whether we change what that structure looks like to become more man-made, it's still natural. We are not other than nature. However, how much lab created or industry created intervention, how much mechanical intervention, which like rototilling, running heavy equipment over our soil, walking on it. That's something that Mel Bartholomew talks about in square foot gardening. With his method, one of the points is that you don't ever walk on the structure of the soil where you're growing. That helps to keep you from needing to do rototilling. We're not going to do his traditional raised bed style square foot gardens here in Collectively Rewilding, but they will be delineated on the land so that you don't walk on them. They will be for growing food, the areas that we have. We're not going to put down a lot of containment to our property. And will have a lot more openness. It's a concept that I've been developing for a long time, so you'll get to see it as it's put into effect here on the property that we're working on. And it will incorporate many elements of what square foot gardening is. I think it's just a brilliant methodology. I encourage you all to look into it. I am going to be looking into it further, both in interacting with possible collaboration through Square Foot Gardening Foundation, as well as possibly taking the course that they offer, just to continue that networking and working with the company that I'd like to collaborate, etc. Right? It's a nonprofit, it's a foundation, it's a .org, squarefootgardeningfoundation.org. All right, excellent place to check out. I don't like linear. I like natural, and so the idea of putting a square here, a square there doesn't work with even the layout of how the light affects the land, or the buns that we've talked about here in collectively rewilding that have that half moon shape, right? That's not a square. So what we'll do is look at the ground. Some of them will be in a more linear fashion. We have a little pavilion out back that needs to be rescued. It's starting to fall apart, but it's still salvageable. And that will provide additional shading from the west for some of the more delicate plants. We have a very harsh light that's going to get through in the summertime from the west, and this pavilion will protect some of those plants, right? Those that really love it will put forward from the pavilion. Those that are a little more shade requiring will go to the to the easterly side, where they'll get that shade in the afternoon. And all of those things taken into account, we'll have a variety of areas that we are growing things in, and we will outline those with probably the gajillion rocks that we're going to dig out of the ground when we build all of these soil structures. And then we are going to utilize Mel Bartholomew's grid idea. I don't know yet what material we'll be utilizing probably this first year. Unfortunately, it'll be used Venetian blinds that we use for the grid lines. And going forward, I would love to see what you can see actually on Square Foot Gardening. Let me show you their website. So it's squarefootgardening.org. I apologize. The pieces that they show here are like wood, lace, and they're just beautiful, but they will cost a little bit, and we're trying to keep costs down as much as possible as we're just beginning with this particular property, getting all of that done in the backyard. It's almost dead soil back there, so starting literally from the ground up, we have to rebuild the health and life of the backyard, which is ideal for my purposes, and that would be a costly endeavor. Wherever we can penny pinch and save that cash to put towards other areas of the garden, we'll be doing that. So at this point, I'm guessing that we'll be going to the local thrift stores, grabbing up some of the Venetian blinds that do have some problems, so that we're not taking the nicer blinds from people, but those that have some missing pieces or broken slats, things like that, and coming home and taking those apart and putting those into the delineated structures, whether they're square, rectangular, circular, half moon, doesn't matter. We don't want to walk on the soil, all right? Really important element of not having to till is not putting all that compaction onto your soil through especially machinery, but yes, also our own weight does compact the soil if we don't want to have to break it up each year. All right, we don't really have any other questions. It doesn't appear that anybody wants to speak up with any questions. Benny seems to have gotten his answered. I am really excited to continue going forward. Next week, we will be able to talk about the video, watching the Mel's mix get mixed up. Very simple process. We'll follow Mel's instructions there. I think I said Mel's mix for the CR's mix. Sorry, they're both something that's on my mind and on my tongue a lot. So for the very first mixing of CR's specific soil components, we'll be putting a little video for you together, and we can talk about that next week, as well as putting them into these flats, what that looks like, what you want it to look like when you're done. You need a little bit of room up at the top, as well as not compacting it. There's a little bit of artistry that goes along with getting your seeds out there. The Seed Starter Handbook had some really good suggestions that I'll cover a little bit with you guys. We're also going to be planting some bulbs here at Collectively Rewilding. This isn't the most traditional time. Traditionally, you plant bulbs in the fall. They need to overwinter. However, you can force them in the spring and they will come in the summer instead of being your tulips and jonquils and a variety of different bulbs that are out there. You can force them as summer bulbs. And so we have several that we'll be doing here at Collectively Rewilding. Again, keeping those pennies in mind, though we may not have pennies for much longer in the current political culture. These are 4 that you can pick up pretty consistently, I think, throughout the nation at the Dollar Tree. For $1.25 a pack, each one has 3 bulbs. I encourage you to go tomorrow. They sell out quickly. They're really pretty. This is one of my favorites here. It's just so gorgeous. The gladiolas. The ranunculus looks a little bit like a rose on a tall, very straight, thin stem. And I can't even try to pronounce these properly. Tritilia, perhaps, something to that effect. These are just gorgeous. The only ones that are a solid color. And finally, these anemone. And it's funny because there are actually sea anemones. And these look like the polyps that the little sea anemones put up. So we're going to be spreading those out this fall or this spring for a forced summer bloom. And then continuing on, those bulbs will come up every spring. They'll continue to bulb and create more and more. So a very, very low cost investment that will increase on your property as the seasons grow together, as the seasons continue on, right? All right, everybody, the final piece is growing the moss that we will cover next week. I'll show you a couple of my favorites. There are 3 different variations here. I'm also going to do a little bit more research into what is sphagnum and what are these other types of moss. These are something that you can regrow yourself. This particular variation is Plagiominium. Oh my goodness, the crazy title there. I'll have all of this worked out for you. I'm already building the information for you guys in this neat new document platform. I'm not sure exactly what they call themselves over here, notion.com, that we've talked about. If you look into the square foot gardening area, we are continuing on with the growing sphagnum moss. And I'm playing with some of the different ways that you can look at the information that we're putting together. All going to be covered here for you, all the different pictures, what it is that we're doing, the labels for the different varieties of moss, the information that we find out in consideration of is sphagnum moss. When I researched sphagnum moss living, these were the mosses that came up. There was nothing titled sphagnum moss that I could just go and purchase, except as a dry variation. So I'm guessing that sphagnum moss is a little bit of a loosely applied term, and then they'll each have their very specific Latin names, right? And so this one is just really pretty. You can see in the pictures when I get those released for you, it almost looks like little teeny tiny ferns. This is my absolute favorite. They gave me a really big chunk, so instead of giving me 2, I got a really big chunk there. And I think this one is also a really neat looking moss here. And I'm not going too much in depth. I want you guys to be excited about seeing it next week, but really neat, really, again, inexpensive ways to go about doing it. It was somewhere around $8 to purchase these 3 different sets of moss. And the containers, again, are from the Dollar Tree, $1.25, provide something that I can grow this moss continuously, harvest it, leave a small patch, grow it, harvest it, grow it, harvest it. Very sustainable. You can also go and forage for it in your local forest. It can be sustainably foraged, and then you can bring it home and grow it, and you don't even have to use it anymore out of the forest resources, right? Anything that we can actually do here on Collectively Rewilding where we don't have to take any resources from outside environments is our main goal. I actually, when we get our Walipini or partially underground greenhouse built, if we're able to have a water feature in there where we maybe have some tilapia or crawfish or freshwater snails, all of those are possibilities. We may also try to have rice paddies just as almost an experiment on our small space, where we would then follow it through to end up with our own rice holes. On this size of an agricultural endeavor, there's not enough to sustainably ourselves grow enough rice to create rice holes for our property. So as we're introducing rice holes, those will be off property, even if we do the small rice growth in the environment of the Wali-Pini. However, sphagnum moss is not only a renewable resource that you can purchase, you can easily grow this yourself, whether you forage it to begin with or purchase it to begin with. You don't have to deplete resources from another environment. You can do it continuing on in your own environment. Really exciting to me. I love being able to create it here instead of having to remove somewhere else's soil, somewhere else's peat moss, somewhere else's top mulch covering, right? Doing anything that we can do here is just amazing to me. So we will go into that more in depth over the coming classes. It will take more than one class, as we'll want to keep an eye on them, see how fast they regenerate, what it would really take if you wanted to at some point not have to purchase any as an outside source or continually go to forage it from the nearby woods that you may have available. All right. Okay, everybody. Sure, nobody. Oh, we do have something in the chat here. Let's check. What inspired the development of the square foot gardening technique is Benny's next question. And actually, Mel Bartholomew covered that in depth. He wanted to be able to have a pleasant experience as a retiree when he approached gardening. He didn't want to have hours and hours of backbreaking labor, as he terms it. To me, it's all fun and games, and it's keeping me healthy and active. Actually, people who garden consistently tend to live longer. So it's a very healthy activity. And it's the lifting and the bending and the squatting and all of these different things that are involved in gardening help to keep people alive. Blue zone living or 100-year-olds, where they have a lot of 100-year-olds around the globe, gardening is almost always a component of someone who has reached the age of 100 years old. So just for your own personal motivation, gardening will keep you alive longer, folks. All right. He wanted to enjoy the process of gardening. He didn't want to have to go out and break up or pay someone to break up his soil. He didn't want to have to be constantly weeding, a lot of these things. Now, when we are using CR's mix, we're not going to separate CR's mix from the soil. We want to slowly amend the soil that we're working with already, as we will when we're adding these components in and not separating it. In the square foot methodology, you actually put no-grow or a plywood bottom or some sort of barrier so that weeds aren't coming up through that. We will slowly be eliminating the unusable weeds. I have a different version of weeds, and the true definition of a weed is a non-indigenous and invasive plant. Which dandelions certainly fall under the definition of, but not all of the things that we might call weeds in our yards or our surrounding environment are actually weeds, all right? So that is a very loosely used term, but he wanted to avoid whatever one might term a weed, and that was a part of it as well. So just really the ease and enjoyment of successful year after year gardening was the reason that Mel Bartholomew developed the square foot gardening method. All right. It is really great, Benny. I agree. Really interesting read. I've gone through that, and I'm currently working on getting the notes transferred out for the all-new square gardening method. I do have the very first printing, and I'm going to read this one as well, folks, because he breaks down a lot of things that like the soil chemistry that he didn't use any longer in the all-new square foot gardening. This is when he started separating it from the soil that was already on his property. In his original version, he didn't separate it. So this is going to have a lot of use to someone that wants to do it like myself, where we are interacting with the soil on our properties and we want to continuously increase the soil and health of the actual property soil, right? And just so that everybody knows where this is all at, square foot gardening is a really neat methodology, really worthwhile topic to tear apart. Here at the squarefootgardening.org website, they have also unveiled the 4th edition of the square foot gardening printing, and it does have some new information in it, so it is worth going and getting. They don't have it yet at Thrift Books. Eventually I'll end up breaking down and buying it brand new if I have to, but it has some additions from my variation, which I think was the original all new square foot gardening. So this is the fourth, that's two in between. And there are definitely some new pieces that are not in the first all new square foot gardening. Worth going and taking a peek at there. The course, all of it really valuable. As I said, I'm hoping that maybe we can do some sort of collaborating. If that happens, I would hope that they would teach their course over in Collectively Rewilding as well. So definitely a methodology that I think is worthwhile to check out. I do believe that we should do everything we can to be sustainable, however. So while checking it out, keep in mind CR's mix to replace Mel's mix, vermiculite replaced with grow stones or rice hulls, peat moss replaced with sphagnum moss, and then Mel's mix blended compost ideology is great. Sound, no reason to mess with something that isn't broken. Really, really neat methodology. Great question, Benny. All right. See if there's anything else. Absolutely, Benny. I enjoy your questions and I love sharing this with you guys. It really is an endlessly fascinating topic to people who watch things grow and anticipate when the sun is going to creep around and warm that soil so that they can get back out there and get their hands dirty into that wonderful, healthy soil that we're all working towards that has those beautifully healthy microbes that interact through our skin when we are out there working in nature, getting that sunlight, working in the shade and helping our plants to have the shade as we begin to go through more and more extremes. That's another thing that Mel Bartholomew really worked out. It wasn't one of his original reasons quite as strongly. It continued on as he developed his own methodology to include a lot of weather and pest protections that you build, right? They're not chemical interventions. So there's a lot to tear through in that methodology. Really, really interesting gentleman. I'm very grateful that he chose to retire as an engineer and probably come up with his true income source, right? This was very, very well sold. I believe that the first book was probably eventually a bestseller, and the additional printings are definitely bestsellers. So the man did pretty well for his second career, right? Really interesting gentleman. All right, you guys, do remember this is going to start happening every week. I'm going to keep it at 7:30 just for a moment. I had jumped the gun and put it at 6:30 for Mountain Time. So right now it is 5:30, excuse me, 6:30 p.m. Pacific, 7:30 p.m. Mountain, 8:30 p.m. Central, and 9:30 p.m. Eastern. We are going to lower it back an hour to 5:30 p.m. Oh my gosh, now I'm just confusing myself. We're going to lower it an hour from what it is currently, but I need to transition some other things in the area where I handle and teach classes. And as those changes roll out in the other community, we will lower this class down by about an hour, as well as making it a weekly class. Just going forward, hope to see you all there. And I hope you all have a wonderful week. Thank you for joining me. Thank you, Benny. And I even remembered where you were and the topic didn't come up. Goodness, just not even fair. All right. Thanks, guys. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Sabrina. Thank you. Bye.
Bye, guys.